Do you feel like you're stuck in this constant cycle of grading chaos where all you do is collect assignments and then you spend your weekend grading those assignments? I know I did, but now with the systems I've created, I no longer bring any grading home on weekends, and I have to say it is amazing. So in my last video, I shared my 16 learning outcome framework with you. If you haven't checked it out, I'll put that link in the description below. But in this video, what I want to do is add on to that and show you my learning outcome checkpoint framework that I use that goes along with it, that helps me to grade really quickly and effectively, so I'm not bringing any work home on the weekends. So it is built on a 3-point scale. Students have to show mastery more than once, so it's not just a fluke. And it allows me to leave at 3 o'clock every single day and not bring any work home. So if you're interested in that, let's get right into it and go and take a look at my systems. Let's start off big picture then. So in terms of students getting grades in my course, what they need to do is they need to demonstrate mastery on those 16 learning outcomes that I have come up with for them. So they need to not only prove mastery once, but they need to prove mastery twice on a learning outcome for me to count it. So this helps me to see that students are not only learning the material, but they're also retaining the material over at least 2 different days. I mean, hopefully it sticks longer than that, but it does give me a framework of being able to check and see that they have retained that information for at least a couple of different days in my course. So this is done in 2 steps. The first step is that students do what I call mastery checks. So these mastery checks are just short little, you can basically think of them like exit tickets that they complete at the end of a lesson. So within a learning outcome, I have, say, 2 or 3 lessons, and so there will be 2 or 3 mastery checks that they need to complete for that particular learning outcome. Now, these are untimed. Students can come up and do them whenever they are ready to do so, and they're very, very low stakes. And so I really like this because this gives students a chance to come and show what they've learned. And it also gives me a chance to address any misconceptions and misunderstandings right on the spot before we get to our second step, which is our checkpoints. Now, all the mastery checks need to be done in a learning outcome in order for me to count that as the first step and the first sort of check that they get towards demonstrating mastery in a learning outcome. The second step then is we do a checkpoint. So these checkpoints, they're a little bit more involved. They happen on a weekly schedule, so I like to pick Thursdays. And the reason I choose Thursdays is because I don't like doing assessments on Mondays or Fridays. There's lots of things that go on and lots of students missing. And I also don't want grading hanging around on a Friday. So that's really why I don't love having stuff on a Friday. And I don't want students stressing about it over the weekend. So I don't like having it on a Monday either. So I could pick Tuesday or Wednesday, but Thursday just, I don't know, it naturally works for me. A lot of my students choose a Thursday, so Thursdays is usually where it happens. Now, these checkpoints are timed. They're a little bit higher stakes because they're timed. And it's a more formal evaluation of the learning outcome itself. And so what it does is it takes those 2 or 3 lessons within a learning outcome and it tests over all of that knowledge in one kind of go. So typically they're only about a page, as you can see here. Sometimes they might be a page back and front. And I try and keep the timing of these checkpoints to 10 to 15 minutes maximum. So they are not taking the entire period. They're only taking a portion of the period, which is great. Now, kind of recapping a little, the reason I do 16 learning outcomes is because it fits perfectly within a semester for me. Typically, my semesters are about 20 weeks, and then, give a couple weeks, give and take here and there, because stuff does come up, as well as we need a little bit of time at the end of our semester to do our final performance task. 16 just works out beautifully in my sort of 20-week semester. If you had an 18-week semester or something different, 16 would work quite nicely there too. And so as students are learning, they're learning one new learning outcome each week. And I try and keep it around 2 or 3, maybe 4 lessons at most per learning outcome. And so, as you can see, students are, for example, doing learning outcome 1 and learning that on the first week. And then the second week, on that following Thursday, is when they would write their checkpoint for learning outcome 1. Like I said, the checkpoint structure is pretty short. I try and keep the timing to 10 to 15 minutes max for a learning outcome, so it doesn't take the whole period, which is really beneficial because if you have students who require extra time because of their IEPs, then you have that built-in class time to be able to provide that extra time for them. So I don't need to go and use any sort of resources outside of my classroom. I can have all of my students writing their checkpoints where they need to be able to ask me questions if they need to as well. And I can get it all done within the time frame that I have. Now, in terms of the schedule, then I have the learning outcome. So say learning outcome 1 happens the version 1 that week. And then the following week, if students are not successful on the version 1, they have a second opportunity to try a version 2 along with the next week's learning outcome, which is a version 1. So regularly I'm running on this Thursday a V1 for the new learning outcome, and then a V2 for the learning outcome from the previous attempt. And typically what I'll do in terms of my structure is I'll have students write the V1 for the new learning outcome first, because everybody is writing that. And then I will have the select students who need to write the V2 do the V2 afterwards. So we kind of reset a couple times and do our learning outcomes and our checkpoints this way. Now, there's some real benefits to having this sort of regular schedule, and I make these expectations really clear to my students when we begin a semester. So students are expected to be in class on those checkpoint days. The only reasons they might not be is if they're very ill and they're home and they've been signed out by a parent. Or if they know that they have an excused absence for, say, sports or an extracurricular or a field trip or something like that, I do expect them to come and prearrange to write their checkpoint with me the day prior. So they would write it on the Wednesday instead. If they haven't done this, and they haven't gone through the steps, it's a missed attempt. So they would be losing that opportunity to try out the checkpoint, and they'd be losing the opportunity for feedback. So the benefit of doing this is I have no students skipping, because they know if they skip the test, then if they're skipping the checkpoint, it means that they're just missing an opportunity, and then there's a bit more pressure on them to be successful on the first attempt that they try. So they don't skip, which is a huge, huge benefit. Now, the reason I do this is because my goal is to get them feedback back as fast as I can. So I always hand them back to students on Friday in class. So the entire cycle of feedback happens before the weekend happens. And it's great because then they always say, give timely feedback. So this is really timely feedback. It's as fast as I can get things back. And typically what I do is I end up grading those checkpoints that they write on Thursday. If it's an earlier class during the day, then I'll mark them in my prep period, or I'll mark them on Friday morning before class happens. So I guess you might be wondering, how do I grade them so fast? How do I turn them around so quickly and get them back into students' hands before the weekend even shows up? Well, I use a 3-point grading scale on my checkpoints, And so I'm not agonizing over points. I'm not agonizing over percentages. I'm not sitting there humming and hawing about whether something is worth 1 mark or half a mark, or should I give no marks, or that actually takes a lot of time when you're thinking about and trying to judge how many marks to allocate. So I get rid of that entirely, and I use a 3-point grading scale, which allows me to mark a little bit more holistically and allows me to hold students to really high expectations. So what is my 3-point grading scale? Well, my 3-point grading scale is either mastered, revise, or not yet. So mastered is pretty self-explanatory. It's if the student has written the checkpoint and everything is absolutely flawless. Like I can't find anything wrong. They've answered everything correctly and beautifully, and it's immaculate. So that would get a mastered mark. And as you can imagine, not many students achieve that mastered because there's usually some sort of silly little mistake in there. And that is what our next one is for revise. So when I'm grading these, I'm looking at, does the student have conceptual understanding of the concept? So a revise would be something where the student does conceptually understand that learning outcome. So for example, if it's something like stoichiometry, and you might not know what stoichiometry is, and that's fine, but they were able to show me all the steps of that process and go through the whole process, and it's laid out very nicely, and they've done all the steps correct. But I might give a revise for something that has minor or non-conceptual errors. So something like if they've done those calculations, but their significant digits are wrong, or if they forgot to include units with their answer, or if they've gone through, say, the steps of that stoichiometry problem, but they've made a math error, and it's like a really silly math error in there. And trust me, there's many silly math errors that happen in these checkpoints. I think because students get like really stressed out when they're trying to do something under a time pressure. Sometimes I even, for example, if it's something like nomenclature, where it's either right or wrong, I might go for more like an 80% accuracy rate on, do they have at least 80% of the naming or the formulas correct? So depending on what the learning outcome is, that's sort of how I judge a revise. I'm looking for those errors, but like not conceptually related to the learning outcome. And I'll give a revise for that. And what then students do on a Friday is when I hand them back, they do those revisions on the spot, and they have to come and show me their revisions before the end of the period to get full credit for that learning outcome. So I think one of the important pieces to kind of point out here is that even if a student does get a revise, it's no different in my gradebook from a mastered. It's just that I want my students to learn from their mistakes and learn to go and correct their work and make those revisions right away. So it's teaching them some good skills and kind of forcing them into doing those good skills. But that's typically what I do with a revise. And then the final one, not yet. This is reserved for if there's some really big conceptual misunderstandings within the checkpoint. So fundamentally, they do not have that conceptual understanding yet. So they're making big errors, like in a stoichiometry problem, maybe they forgot to do one step of the calculation that makes a huge difference, right? Or they forgot, hey, I need to go balance the equation first before I do my calculations. That's a big one. And that's kind of a big conceptual misunderstanding within that particular learning outcome. So for those ones, the not yet, they do need more practice, so they can attempt the version 2 the following week. And that gives them another opportunity to go back, try some further practice, get some extra help, learn where the conceptual misunderstandings are happen, and then try again the following week. What I really love about this 3-point grading scale is that It eliminates that grade grubbing that you get from students where they come up and be like, oh, I need a half a mark extra here, or I should have gotten 1 mark here, or I deserve 1 more mark here. And what they're trying to do is basically just game the system, right? And try and accumulate more points to get their grade up. When you take the points away, there's nothing to grub over. They either conceptually get it or they conceptually do not. And you can point out and easily defend your judgment call on whether they get the concept or whether they don't. So no more grade grubbings. Instead, I'm finding that what's happening is the conversations are moving more towards learning and more towards understanding of why they're not understanding the concept over trying to just fight for grades, which is amazing and is the best thing ever to happen in my classroom. So why this keeps my weekends free is it's very decisive grading. So like I said, I'm not agonizing over points. I'm not agonizing over, is this a 73? Is this a 75? Is this a 76? It's either conceptually right or conceptually not correct. And so I can just look at that overall evidence, I can make a decision, and then I can move on. So it makes the grading actually very fast, and I can usually get a set of checkpoints for a class graded within, say, 10-15 minutes. It doesn't take me very much time at all when I know what I'm looking for. And then the other reason why it's saving me a lot of time is I have those revision loops built in class time. So they happen on a Friday. I don't leave it for over the weekend. It's a quick check by me. It's very little time. It's me just kind of taking a quick glance. Did they do the revisions right? You know, I normally mark off and say things like, I'll just put in SD if it's sig digs or units or something like that. And then they have to come and show me those revisions. So it happens very quickly. They have to show me during class or they're not getting credit for it. And then no checkpoint grading is happening after the bell rings on Fridays. So I get to go home and I get to enjoy my weekend. What I've really learned from my systems and what I really love about this style of mastery-based grading is that it's still rigorous. It's actually more rigorous than if I was doing points and percentages in my classroom. So rigor to me, it doesn't mean that we're hiding behind those points or percentages. Instead, what rigor means to me is holding students to high expectations. They need to understand that concept to get full credit for it in my class. They can't just skate by with a 50% kind of knowledge base on do they get the concept or not? No. They need to fully understand the concept in order to get credit for it to go towards their final grade. And then it also gives them opportunities to learn from their mistakes. You know, we always say the best kind of learning happens when we learn from our mistakes. So this system is set up in a way that allows students to make those mistakes and go and try again the following week. And finally, it gives them a very predictable path. So having the set day, students know we always do checkpoints on that Thursday. You know, it keeps a very sort of consistent, reliable schedule, and students know that we cycle through those learning outcomes. So it keeps things going at a good pace, a flexible pace, and keeps things moving along in my classroom. So as you could probably tell, systems are absolutely key to staying organized with any of this kind of work. And I have a lot of systems in play here that I am using as I'm keeping myself organized in my classroom. I've been working on a new system of individual progress trackers for students where I'm divvying out those learning outcomes and the lessons through an automated Google Sheets. So I'm getting away from using my learning management system, which if you've ever used a learning management system before, which I'm sure you all have, is full of clicks. And there are so many clicks to getting something posted on your learning management system. So this was driving me mental. So I have created a nice hopefully really seamless workflow with Google Sheets that I'm going to be sharing in my next video. So in that video, I'm going to show you the template I've built, as well as how I've used AI to help me build the magic behind the scenes. So make sure, if you don't want to miss out on that video, that you subscribe. And thanks for joining me today, and we'll catch you in the next one.